and welcome back to the next episode of OS
Wars. Hello everybody, welcome to the studio. This is your commentator and friendly neighborhood OS user. What are your thoughts on the game tonight?
Well, who have we got lined up? We have got Linux versus Windows.
Exactly, in the right corner we have Linux. It's a lifelong operating system, been alive since the 90s. Sort of a new kid on the block though, only recently gained popularity. It now currently forms the core of Chrome OS, the Steam Deck's OS, and every server system under the sun. And in the left corner,
There's Windows. Windows has been a staple of many people's life, one people turn to for comfort and, well, what most people are forced into.
so without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's see some OS's rumble!
So I'm going to be the Windows supporter and you are going to be...
The Linux supporter.
So I'm going to say my first point. We support companies. Companies support us, as I should rather say. Because when you load onto a laptop, your company will already most likely have Windows pre-installed, courtesy of us.
It's an interesting point. As you know, company support is a very important aspect in the success of an operating system, which is why Linux has the support of many big companies, including IBM, who helped develop the Red Hat operating system, Google, Amazon, and even Microsoft themselves. Microsoft Azure actually runs on Windows. So if you're looking for support, then Linux has that too. And as for your point about companies supporting that, well, companies support the big thing. If Linux were the big thing, then companies would just move support to Linux.
But unfortunately, Windows is the big thing. And actually, we've got the support of many companies, which makes us clearly the better brand, as well as promoting us.
But of course, everything isn't about the companies, is it? Let's also talk about the experience for the user. And in this demand, Linux really triumphed. It's lightweight, it's easy to use on any computer it comes installed on. The lightweightness and the lack of memory usage means it always is feeling snappy, and it just feels faster. Whereas Windows, sure, on a high-end system that it's built specifically for, yeah, it can feel good. But give it a few years, hardware starts to get old, gets dated very quickly.
Okay, but the thing is, even though it may be lightweight, we have such beefy computers nowadays that actually Windows runs just fine. So there isn't always a need to go over to Linux. And actually, the migration over to Linux can be so difficult, especially if you've started off on Windows. Trying to migrate and move all your files can be such a challenge. So why move when you can stick? It may be more bloated, but we've got such beefy computers. Wouldn't you want to show off your computer's power by running Windows?
Show off is a fun way of saying inhibit your computer's powers, Ruben. Because although Windows might have more game support, many games have actually been found to run much faster on Linux due to its lower memory consumption, freeing up more memory for said games. So if you really want to make the most of your hardware, you simply use Linux. And of course, it isn't just about high-end software we're talking about. Let's please put our shoes in, Edgar's mind. Edgar is an old man. He's using a iMac from 2001. He doesn't want to have to learn something else. Simply put Linux on his machine. It'll run perfectly. Windows, modern Mac OS, slow the machine down. They simply use far too much memory.
But going on your point of gaming, you ask 90% of gamers, I reckon, and they'll all say Windows is the operating system they use because there's the compatibility with it. You plug in a driver, and when you plug in your drivers, it will all work. All your peripherals and all your stuff will work. Whereas actually, there's so many challenges of trying to get your right software, if you want to be streaming on Twitch, the right drivers. Yes, it's getting better, but it just isn't on the level of Windows for gaming.
Simply untrue. Windows, yes, does have much driver support, but the act of installing those drivers is much tougher. On Windows, half of your hardware doesn't even work out the box because all of those drivers have to be installed. You install the NVIDIA drivers. If you install the wrong driver, you can't make the most of your card. You install your motherboard's drivers. Oh, what a pain. Oh, turns out these motherboard's drivers are out of date. Oh, what am I going to do? On Linux, we have what's called a monolithic kernel, meaning all of our drivers are built into the kernel. When you plug in a new graphics card on Linux, provided the drivers are in the kernel, meaning they're open source, unlike NVIDIA's drivers, it just works.
But the compatibility just isn't always there with Linux.
Well, yes, for certain high-end stuff, for example, Logitech's Elgato microphones or Stream Decks, yeah, they just won't work on Linux. The drivers are simply proprietary. They will never work. But I'll bet you 90% of people are not full-time e-girl Twitch streamers. They do not use that kind of hardware. Most people have integrated graphics, they have a wired keyboard and mouse. All of that is simply going to work, provided it uses USB. It's just going to work out of the box.
But we have support for most external hardware. Windows, you have your device, and 90% of these devices will be supported with Windows. Yes, you might have to install the drivers, but I beg to differ. It is easy. Those wizards is click next, 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 sorted. You have to go into a kernel and type stuff in, which actually people don't have to Google how to type in their code correctly. And you could easily misspell a word, whereas Windows just uses the GUI. You use the GUI installer where you just got to click next and it does it for you. I installed Unity on Windows today, and it was the easiest thing I'd done in ages. I clicked download, I clicked open file, I clicked next, 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 and there it was done.
Only people who have only ever used Windows think wizards are easy. Wizards are the inverse of easy. You have to go to a dodgy link on a website you don't trust and install
Unity's website.
How do you know it's Unity's website? How do you know somebody hasn't just copied the HTML and made their own website? You have to trust that the website's correct. You have to trust you click on the correct link. You have to install it using a wizard that looks like it's from Windows XP. And you have to then pray that your software works, and B, your software doesn't have 15 Trojans hiding within it that are about to infiltrate your system.
Well, that isn't a part on Windows.
Linux, we have app stores. App stores save us. App stores are trusted repositories of software that, even if you install the wrong software, simply uninstall. App stores are also monitored by the creators of that distro to ensure that no malicious software gets on there. You do not have that same amount of trust with Windows.
Well, actually, it's wrong, because if you're installing the wrong software because you went to the wrong website, that isn't Windows' fault. That's your fault being the weakest link and you being socially engineered. Whereas it's not Windows' fault, because actually if you get the right website, and that's fairly easy to do, and you install it, it installs like that. So easy, so simple.
Then why doesn't Windows have an app store?
We do.
If it's objectively better. The Microsoft Store. Come on. The Microsoft Store has been around for what? Since 2015? What's that? Nearly 10 years? And it's still unreliable, untrustworthy, and simply inferior than downloading stuff off the web.
Exactly, you just said it there. Downloading stuff off the web is the way to go.
It's better, but it doesn't mean it's best.
It is better. So, and even our app store is really good. For big apps like Disney Plus and Spotify, because you just got to click download. Major games apps can be a bit more iffy, but hey, if you're just installing like streaming services and music, actually it's perfect.
Then why does the Microsoft Store make itself so important, and why does it advertise itself so much if it's just not ready? As you said, like, certain software can simply not be installed through it, and if you want to get rid of the Microsoft Store, which as many people would want to, you realise that it's so built into Windows. Even apps like calculator.exe will not work without the Microsoft Store. On Linux, software is developed independently by all sorts of people, meaning even if you don't like really low ends, deep into the kernel stuff like init system, you can just change it. It's simple as.
But in turn, why would you want to get rid of it? The reason we have to keep it around is because companies pay a commission to be on there. So if companies didn't think being on the App Store was worthwhile, why would they pay Microsoft to be on there? That's why it isn't being removed, because Microsoft are earning money from it. Let's
segue from that point to another thing that bugs a lot of Windows users, which is ads. As of Windows 11, there are currently ads for certain apps like Instagram built into the operating system. Even Apple doesn't have this. Apple takes a straight 20% commission from all the apps in the App Store. They do not bother shoving apps into your operating system. You claim that Linux is distracting and hard to learn. What's more distracting than being openly advertised to while you're using an operating system?
You know what is more distracting? When you find out that your Linux has crashed, or when you having to Google because your Linux just isn't working how you expected it to work, and you turned it on and you couldn't find your files. So now you have to just scroll through endless lines of code, or you're having to search through File Manager from companies that are smaller and more independent, which don't have the workload and the task force as someone like Microsoft do.
Yes, Linux has its moments, but as you said with your point on downloading stuff off the web, whenever Linux breaks, it's always your fault. You are the one who did something, you're the one who changed something, and now your operating system is broken because of you. And as for the point about the lack of big companies, Canonical, massive British company that own Ubuntu, and they do their own development outside of that. Deepin is a Chinese conglomerate that owns Deepin OS. Red Hat and Fedora being the operating system that the creator of Linux, Linus Torvalds, uses, owned by IBM, the number one cloud coding company and server company. The support is there.
You can't forget about their quantum computers.
And of course quantum computers,
Don't know why
they're a bit goofy. Yeah, sure, they're not quite there yet. But they're a big company. What else matters?
Nothing else matters. The GUI can be a bit buggy. Don't get me wrong, because there aren't as many people working, it can be buggy. You've seen it firsthand, it being buggy.
It's true. It has its moments. But I think that's mostly to blame with the fact that Linux being used as a desktop operating system is still quite new. I mean, for most of its history, Linux was exclusively servers. You would only be using the command line. And many of the bugs that are due to it are due to
software.
Not outdated software, the drivers themselves. If you plug in an AMD graphics card, it will work flawlessly because those drivers are open source. NVIDIA graphics cards are where the GUI problems start to come up. Why? Because those drivers are proprietary.
But your GUIs are only good because you've copied Windows. You have literally taken the GUI from Windows and changed a couple lines of code.
We do not copy Windows, we copy what works. And what Windows has made has worked.
Exactly.
However,
Windows
the GUI itself is good, but it is out of date. Windows has been using the same GUI, pretty much start menu, tasks, desktop icons, since '98. We're innovating, we're changing. New Linux GUIs are coming out every day. Who
needs a new GUI when actually the one you know and you're comfortable with works and is functional, and it's easy to know where all your files are, or where all your bars are and everything. It's simple and it's all laid out nicely.
I won't argue that if you understand the GUI well, then you should stick with it. But that brings up another point. Why bother updating Windows anyway? If Windows is so great and if the GUI is just so timeless and flawless, then why do they keep changing it? Why do they keep moving stuff around? Why is the taskbar in the middle now? Why are the widgets here?
Like you said, we just need to innovate. We are just catching up with some of the praises.
This is not innovation. This is not innovation. This is fluff. This is copying macOS because it looks pretty. That is what Windows 11 is.
We can agree that macOS is really sexy.
It's true. Despite the many layers of internal problems, macOS do be pretty sexy.
I will say this then. Everyone has Windows. So what makes Windows so good? Everyone has it. If you ask most people have Windows, which means it's most people's primary use of when you go to work, most people will use Windows, which means when they get home they're used to using Windows. So everyone knows and understands Windows, having more support from everyone.
It's true. However, that's only the case because of Microsoft's overwhelming dominance of the market. I mean, they are a monopoly. Apple cannot stand up to them. Linux cannot stand up to them. BSD cannot stand up to them. It is an open monopoly, which means if Microsoft wants to undermine its customers, like it has many times with Windows 11, all that charging you for new Windows licenses every time you change motherboard.
Most people just
they are ripping you off.
Most people just pirate a license.
Is that good? Do you promote that?
Well,
how's your big company supposed to get so rich if they aren't making money from their own operating system?
Multiple ways. But I will have you know that according to Mr. Watts, he finds that using a pirated version of Windows often runs better than the actual version of Windows, meaning actually Windows...
So you're saying your software's even better if you use it illegally?
I'm saying that you don't always have to pay for the best version of Windows, because Windows is still the one everyone goes for, and it isn't expensive if you choose to pirate it.
Well, yes, but you're still going to get the little activate Windows thing in the bottom corner.
Buy a Windows key or pirate a Windows key.
So you're advocating using an operating system illegally in order to make it better. I mean, yes, I understand the merits of piracy, and if you've got to use it that way and you honestly can't afford a Windows license, then, go for it. But we should not be encouraging piracy as a way of using an operating system. And Linux bypasses this in a very simple way. By being free, by being there. I mean, Chromebooks. Look at Chromebooks. Chromebooks have allowed so many more people to get on the internet and really start using it without the constraints that Windows sets up with its high bar of this is how much RAM we need, this is how much CPU power we need. Chrome OS is Linux.
I cannot argue that Chrome OS has done amazing things for schools, for people, and as well, having the fact that Windows is open source means we don't have to advocate for piracy is amazing, because we shouldn't be advocating for piracy, full stop. But sometimes we need it to get the job done. And that's what Windows do, they get the job done.
One more point, however. I understand that proprietary software does have its drawbacks. However, with other proprietary software that's specifically developed by one company, for example, Apple's macOS, Spark Systems by Sun Microsystems, at least those operating systems are developed specifically by those companies to run on that hardware. They know they have a very small set of hardware that they're meant to be run on, which means they're going to be much faster, they're going to be much more specialized. Windows, on the other hand, is run on so many computers that it has to work for every single one, meaning it can never specialize to run well on one computer, meaning it's inevitably going to make sacrifices.
Well, we just have better hardware. The computers that run Linux are so expensive, and to end on this actually is amazing, because until Linux start having computers with Linux already being shipped, with computers with Linux already on them being shipped like Windows, you're never going to win. But actually the companies who make the laptops, such as Dell and HP, they've got the backing of Windows, and we back them as well. So actually, you're never going to win this.
We will see, won't we? We will see.
Well, I think that was a fantastic episode. That was definitely
a very fiery debate.
I think it was way better than the last podcast we just recorded. I really enjoyed that one.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I hope you all enjoyed too, watching us yell at each other over funny lines of code that don't really matter in the end. Remember, your whole life isn't about operating systems, but if you are going to use an operating system, please do use Linux. And thank you very much for listening. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.